Welcome to Channel 17, the Town of Colonie Government Channel.
Hello and welcome to The Money Factor. I'm Richard Naylor, your host. Today we're going to be talking about economic development from a somewhat different perspective. We look at how to attract businesses, but we don't always look at why people would want to come here to work, and that might be more important. Our guest today is Catherine Hedgeman. She's working in this area and has a lot of interesting ideas to share with us. I want to welcome you to the show, Catherine.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
I read a couple articles in the newspaper that either you had written or that were written about you, and that's how I got to know something about the work you're doing. But could we back up and just tell people a little bit about yourself?
Oh, sure. I was born and raised here in Albany, and I actually have what I call Capital Region education. I went to Academy of the Holy Names, Union College, and then Albany Law School. So one of the things that I think this area prides himself on, as do I, is the quality of education. And as a young person growing up, I think the message has always been to me that we would love to have you stay here after you graduate and become a good addition to this community. And because of that message, that's really the reason why I'm here today and part of the reason why I do the things that I do.
That's great. Now, you started an organization called The Stakeholders, and it was that article that I first saw. Could you tell us what that is and why you started it?
Sure. Well, the origin and the idea came to me after reading Richard Florida's book, The Rise of the Creative Class. And in that book, one of his basic concepts is that it's creativity and the creative class that drives economic sustainability, economic growth. That concept is in direct challenge to what I think economists and even socioeconomic folks call the traditional model, which would be that jobs and companies and technology drive economic growth. And having read Florida's book, one of the things that occurred to me, and one of the things as a young person growing up here, and then now I'm into my 30s and out in the workplace, is that there are some societal, cultural issues and barriers, whether it be generational, racial, religious perhaps, or simply just cultural differences that we need to change that environment, that parochialness, that traditionalist approach here in the capital region. And thus, Stakeholders is an organization that I've formed to really bring together that creative class, those that are already here. Hopefully we will be able to attract some other folks to this area and retain them, in the hope that we will penetrate society and change the socioeconomic approach that we've had here in order to continue along our path of economic growth. It's a mouthful.
It's a mouthful, but you've said a lot, and it gives us a lot of ways to go on. I think one of the underpinnings of it, and that's reflected in the name of an organization that I think existed, perhaps was it Rochester or somewhere in Western New York, Under 40 or 40?
It's called 40 Below.
40 Below, which is not cold in this case.
That's right, that's right. Their young professionals organization in Syracuse is called 40 Below, and it's attached to the Metropolitan Development Authority. And a lot of what they were doing was a very tangible impact agenda. And that's part of what I wanted to do here. However, while a large majority of the participants and stakeholders will be folks that are Generation X and Y, Stakeholders is really more about, like I said, the creative class. And of course, we welcome the boomers and the traditionalists and anyone who wants to be a part of this program and to work with us.
And that's everybody now.
Yes, and it truly needs to be everyone. And that is probably the biggest difference between, say, Stakeholders and an under 40 organization or a young professional.
Yeah, that kind of drew a line in the sand and
yes.
said, you're good and you're not.
Right. Well, yes, in a certain way, yes. And one of the things that has been a huge attraction for people to stakeholders is that it's not a typical networking group, it's not a typical business development group, but rather people are coming together to discuss ideas. You know, perhaps it's on how we can support arts and the culture and theater here in the capital region, and what do the next generation of audiences want for that. We're also going to be looking at, you know, how do we groom the next generation of civic and government leaders, and, you know, what does that look like? Philanthropy is another issue. So it's all about ideas and how we come up with new approaches to maybe perhaps old problems and new problems, and make this a sustainable community where we won't have the brain drain. We won't have this disconnect between generations or, you know, different types of viewpoints. And, you know, our programs will be geared and initiatives will be geared towards that.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
We've had people on the show who talked about the importance of education, and I know in this area we've always recognized that that was one of our major strengths.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Now, people worried about students leaving, and I went to a college, Indiana University, where people loved this atmosphere, and college students didn't want to leave. They had to leave because everybody wanted to stay.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're the area that's producing all the students that need to go out in the rest of the state and other states, well, everybody can't stay. Now,
Mm-hmm.
how do we tie this in a little better to the other projects that are going on, the economic development projects? It's about the person, right? It's about the student that's learned something, they have a skill. Now, what's important to them? And I guess to know that, we have to go back and talk about the generation things.
Yes, I mean, right now, Generation X is in the workforce, but we are a smaller generation than the Y, which is right behind
Now,
us.
what about the age? What are the ages of these? Because some of us get confused.
Sure. Generation Y, or otherwise known as the millennials, is what they're calling
okay,
them.
that's the same.
Is roughly 1979 to about 1990.
So 80 to 2000 is 20, 27, so 2030s?
No, they're young 20s.
Young 20s,
Young
okay.
20s, late 20s, and then Generation X is more of a 1969 through 1980 or 1979. So we're in our mid-30s, most of us. Some of us might be right on the cusp of maybe 41, 40.
Right.
And then, of course, you have the boomers who are, I believe, 1946 to 1965.
I know that one.
Yes, and the traditionalists, of course, are earlier than 1946.
Right, and those are getting fewer.
Yes, but I mean, there's such value there. One of the things that I would love to see stakeholders do is there's the Senior Services Third Age Awards, and these are octogenarians who are still serving their community and doing fabulous things. Putting them together with some of our Xers and millennials to share experiences and perhaps, you know, talk about the differences and why it's so, and hopefully foster a better understanding of how to work together to make this a sustainable community. You know, the traditionalists that we do have in this community are still very, very active, and some of them are serving in government, a nonprofit sector, and education. And I don't think they realize a lot of the time how much the millennials and Generation X value their opinion and their input on things.
I guess I can say thank you for the boomers.
Yeah, and the boomers too. You know, I think, you know, the differences really come in, perhaps let's take the workplace for example. We, Generation X, that would be me, grew up in an era of latchkey kids. You know, a lot of our parents divorced, and you know, we were left to fend for ourselves, and we did a pretty good job at it. So we're
this
very
was the first generation that tolerated divorce at all.
Yes, and you know, that independence. You know, even if your parents were together, they were both in the workforce, because women were really in the workforce in pretty large numbers at that time, and it's that independence aspect of it, and also the fact that we saw our parents, our boomers, get downsized, and we really don't believe in institutions companies, large institutions in the way that the boomers do. And because of that, I think you're seeing a new trend, and one that I've recently jumped on last year is this concept of generation entrepreneur. Independent, you're the boss, you have to answer to yourself, you can't be downsized, you know, your ideas are your business, and it's a very different workplace culture that we would be attracted to as opposed to, say, what the boomers are used to, large corporation with a hierarchy, with the thought that, you know, you do a good job, you're going to move up.
And yet, I guess there's a lesson here for larger companies, and most companies, even if they're small, they want to be larger.
Yes.
They don't say, okay, I want to work 80 hours a week the rest of my life. They generally say, I want to grow and have another office and
Right.
that kind of thing. So if they're going to get bigger, what do they have to learn in order to change the culture?
Well, they have to learn a lot of things. First and foremost is that because, as I mentioned before, Generation X and Y are smaller in number than the baby boomers, there will be less people in the workforce. How do you compete for the most talented and the folks that you want to gain their loyalty? For our generation in particular, and I think the millennials are similar, but I think there's a little bit of a twist on that, which I can address later. But for Xers in particular, if we're going to stay at the large corporations, paying us more money isn't necessarily the way to keep us there. We're looking for more of the tangible benefits, perks, what we would call that side of the business, where we have the mentality, and especially as entrepreneurs, you work maybe 7 o'clock in the morning till 3 o'clock. You take a break because your family's home from school and you want to have dinner and all that, and then you're back to work by 8 o'clock for another 4 hours. And oftentimes that flexibility, that's right. You're working just as hard or perhaps even longer with that model, but there's this institutional idea, maybe it's a boomer idea, that if you're not in the office between 8 and 6, and you couldn't possibly be doing it right. You know, you couldn't possibly be working hard enough.
Because maybe the underlying assumption in that case is normal people don't like to work. They'd rather be doing something else. So we have to control you and make sure you're here between 9 and 5, and we'll watch you work.
Right. And again, it's that concept of flexibility and independence and balance that Generation X is seeking in their workplace. Health benefits is another, you know, in the age where perhaps the costs are rising and employers are picking up less of that cost. With the idea of family and balance, we want to be able to know that that's in place. Same thing for our retirement. And quite frankly, I think more important even than the benefits is we want to be doing quality, interesting work where we're promoted on merit, not just because we've sat around for 20 years and it's our turn. We have a very different viewpoint of promotion and than I think the boomers do.
And I think then once you put that into place, you realize the motivation is different. And with a different motivation, what you're looking for is to bring out creativity, which doesn't work the same way as working faster and putting out more widgets. You really need to be able to have the, I guess, the presence of mind, the peace, the ability to think, and not to necessarily be looking like you're frenetic all the time.
Right, and I'm a big proponent of working smarter and not longer. And I think with the technology and our ability to use it, and I even think the millennials are much more technologically savvy than Generation X, because they're the 2 or 3-year-old that's already been introduced to the computer and the DVD player. And
well, the computer was invented more in the 80s for the normal person, so 82 is...
You know, yeah, in 82, Xers are about 7 or 8 years old, so it really wasn't something that we picked up on.
And that was expensive then, and we didn't even know what we were doing with them, and spreadsheets probably wasn't the thing that a 7-year-old was going to go for.
Right, you know, and I think that there is certainly still a place for everyone in the workplace, but I think coming to an understanding of what our value system is will help the boomers and the traditionalists better understand how they attract and retain us.
Right.
And I think that carries over into other sectors. You know, why volunteerism? What does it take to get an Xer or a millennial to volunteer for a non-for-profit? Well, it's an entirely different thing. I think the research has shown the boomers are more inclined to write the check and feel good about that they've made a contribution. While we're not in a financial state yet, perhaps, to be doing that in any high number of money, we want to know that we've made the world a better place, that we've changed things with our two hands. And so, a pitch from a nonprofit may not be that cold phone call, could you please send, us $100, but rather, gee, on our board, we really could use somebody who's, financial services or an attorney or a marketing person.
Really.
That's right, that is younger and that would love to take on a project and really make a difference in the lives of the people that we serve. And that is what, that sort of, what would you call it, in a perfect world that we're looking for when we look at service opportunities. I think the other area too is the arts and culture and supporting the theater. A lot of theaters and are struggling. Why is that? Is it a marketing problem? Probably. If you want younger audiences, well then the shows need to be, a little more cutting edge, maybe some technology. And we're not necessarily picking up the Times Union or some other periodical with an ad for Proctor's or Capital Rep. We're online. We're getting it from electronic sources.
And that's probably hard to believe, but I know a lot more advertising dollars is going into the internet, and I think it's growing faster than anything else. It's taken over, I think it's past newspapers practically.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if I want to know what's going on at Proctor's, or if there's a show coming up, or Capital Rep, or any, I go on the internet and I bring up their webpage and I say, oh, this is what it's about, and I can buy tickets here, and then you're all set.
Right.
You don't have to go anywhere. You don't have to pick up the phone. You can do it at 4 o'clock in the morning if that suits you.
Yeah.
It's sort of how does the generation want to be communicated to?
Right.
And that carries over into a lot of different sectors.
I made a distinction between a small company and a big company, which could give the idea that I think that in a big company one needs to change, whereas in a small company they're naturally creative and open. But it strikes me that, well, let's say restaurants and the people that wait the tables. One restaurant has bright people who are clever but understand how to be good waiters, and another one has people who forget and rather not be there. And it's small business, but where do you want to go? So it seems like these are lessons that everybody really needs to learn.
Yes, and I mean, I think, I've talked a lot about how X and Y and how we feel about certain things, but we aren't without our own critical analysis. And, I think the service sector, which is really what you were just talking about, the values that the boomers had, and that everything that you do should be something that you put your entire self into and your reputation's on the line, whether it's waiting tables or bagging groceries. I think the millennials in particular, and I don't mean to pick on them, but they're from a different generation where, they've been raised by school communities and parents that are always messaging to them, you're special. You don't have to worry about that, and you can do this, and you're special. And so, whereas my first job when I was 16 was waiting tables, and it was very valuable.
It's hard to feel special.
Well, right, but it's a very valuable lesson. I
Right.
mean, everybody has to have their first job, and you work and you keep building on things. And I think that work ethic came from my parents who were boomers. And the millennials, on the other hand, a lot of these high school students, I had 2 jobs in high school. They don't have any job at all because, well, you need to focus on your education and you're special. And, it's just a different child rearing and different values now that they have going forward into the workplace. And not to mention, they are bright. They've had an outstanding education and they're technologically savvy. So writing down somebody's order, perhaps at Ponderosa or Ground Round, really isn't thrilling to them. But I think that,
And yet that might be all they can get. And
well, right. I
might
mean,
need the
you're in
money.
high school. I mean, what exactly are you going to do? And that is where I would say that the service sector could take a real advantage of that in marketing to that generation and saying, yes, you do this because you need to be paid for, school or whatever it is that car that you're trying to buy. But, if you come and volunteer at the hospital 10 hours a week, we can not only teach you these skills, but you're making a difference. And, I think...
And there's a pride there.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it's two different generations. Even between the Xers and the millennials, it's interesting because I look at them and I say, gee, I've been working since I was 14, and you're getting your first job your second year in college. Why is that?
Right.
Entirely different mentality.
Yeah, I certainly understand your mentality better than the other one that you described. Now, we're looking also at jobs. We're looking at how we can get the economy to develop. And so we're saying that if we want people to come here, we have to make it a nice place to be. What parts of our society here in the Capital District do you think we should focus on?
Well, we are very institutional and parochial, and when I say those words, I don't necessarily mean to be that negative about it, but it's the reality of it. What opportunities, we have to ask ourselves, are available for, I'll take myself as an example, for a young woman coming out of college, or perhaps coming out of a master's program or a law school or a medical program. And, what is it about the area that would make us want to stay here? I think first and foremost, what I hear from a lot of young professionals is we absolutely have to be in a town or a city where there's other young people that have the same interests and are like-minded like we are. And, that's why New York City and Washington, D.C. and Atlanta, Georgia are very popular, San Diego.
Boston.
A lot of young people, yes. And what I found years ago when I started another organization, Gen Next, was that I pulled some voting records just to take a quick snapshot of who was registered to vote in Albany County. And between 18 and 36, there was almost 10,000 registered voters, and that was just registered. So the numbers are here, but where are they? What are the connections? How are we connecting young people? How do they know this? So that was really the impetus for starting Gen Next, which is a council of the Albany Colonie Regional Chamber of Commerce, and bringing young people together for business opportunities and, quite frankly, just to share interests and have friends that would make them want to stay here, and messaging to them that they are the future and this is why you should stay here. So in looking at that entire array of things that I just mentioned, what are the opportunities? Can a young woman that comes out of college or law school run for town council around here? Run for city council, senate, whatever it is? Or can they come out and serve on a nonprofit board?
Or at least would they be welcome in a party, and
yes.
would they be given attention?
Yes. 5 years ago, I would have been hard-pressed to say the answer to that question is yes. After Gen Next and the success that that's had, and hopefully as stakeholders moves forward, and there's several other groups, there's a Capital Region Young Professionals group as well, and a lot of the nonprofits now have started associate boards or have a young leadership council. All of these collective organizations together are advancing the dialogue between the generations, and that we are invested in this community. We would love to be involved, and we'd like to stay here. Please open the door to us. And fortunately, and much to some of our surprise in certain circumstances, they have opened the door, but a crack. We have a long way to go, I would say. And so the cultural part of this would be acceptance, diversity, different point of view. This, concept of, well, we're boomers and we're in charge, so that's it, really needs to be softened a little bit. And our approach of, we're young, we're smart, and we want to be in leadership positions needs to be softened a little bit. But bringing the two together can only move the entire region forward.
There has to be, doesn't there, a certain critical mass if we want to move things forward? And I was thinking, you have a certain number of people here. You recognize that you started a group. If the people here who already feel the way you do were organized enough, it seems like they would thereby just about create the interactions that they need.
Yes, and that is the very essence of what I hope
like self-designing, or
yes, stakeholders will do. And that is sort of fill in the gaps, make the connections, be a conduit for connections, fill in the gaps, and perhaps be a catalyst of or for this creative class and bringing that about. Because we truly, we always go back and forth, a lot of the young people that sit around and talk about this on a Sunday afternoon, and that, is it the chicken or the egg? Is it the jobs that need to be here first in order for somebody to come, or is it the culture and the things to do and the sustainable community living and the quality of life? And there's been a lot of research done, especially by another consulting firm. It's called Generation Next Consulting Firm. And she has a book out, and one of the things she says is that we're the live first, work second generation. And that is, we look at the place before we look at the job. And I never really thought about this, but in my own experience, when I relocated to Washington after I graduated from college, I just wanted to go to Washington.
Right.
I didn't have a job. I was going to look for one, didn't know what it was going to be. But that is so true now.
Now,
and
did you go before you actually had a job, or did
Yes.
you? Okay, well,
Yes.
that's the courage.
I mean, I was going to pursue a master's program, but and started to do that, but you still needed that job, and it sort of was a where would I like to be, where would I like to live and to work, and you pick that first, and then you worried about the jobs. And here I think that is going to be a critical piece of attracting new people, no matter what age group or demographic that you're in. Is this a sustainable community with great social activities, sports activities, entertainment, and good schools, whatever it is that's important to you, but getting that critical mass together is what I hope stakeholders will do through a variety of its initiatives, and that ideas will come out of this and people will take it among themselves to start creating this type of cultural environment to promote economic growth.
Let's hope so.
Yeah.
In a way, a nucleus is a very dense thing, and it may be small, but it's powerful. And I'm thinking of the Nano College.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a big space, but there's $4.5 billion at last count in that space. And that has attracted this dense, intense, creative mass, has attracted people from all over the world.
Mm-hmm.
And now in this world of internet and interconnectedness, maybe we can do something we couldn't do in the past, where you said, well, you need New York, where all the people are together.
Mm-hmm.
In a way, we're together all over the world.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think too that the Tech Valley initiative and the nanotech program at the State University is critical and is a significant part of economic development in this area, and has drawn even people from other cultures. My baby boomer mother had commented the other day when we were out at a restaurant that there was folks speaking a different language over here, and it turned out to be Portuguese, and that we had run into folks that
Brazil,
were Russian. And she commented in that how different that is than her childhood here and growing up here and working here, and that things are really changing. And to me, who's traveled abroad and had a liberal arts education, it wasn't something that I really noticed.
With it because
right, it's normal to me. It's expected, and I was excited by it because that is really how the rest of the world operates outside of Capital Region New York. And until you've gone out and even other parts of the country, not to mention abroad, and come back, you really see how localized and how conservative perhaps and not diverse that we are. Yet the demographics are here. So there has to be a catalyst, which again is why I think there's a role for stakeholders to play in that. And,
and be not seen nor heard certainly wouldn't help, because you really want to bring this out so everybody can see that the Capital Region has some life.
Right, and the prosperity that should come from the nanotech initiative and the technology initiatives, people need to know about that outside that nucleus of what's going on and how it does affect them. And that even if they're not in the technology sector, what good this will do from the economy and what the effect will be for everyone. I think one of my friends said it the best when we were sitting down talking about some of these concepts and things that we thought stakeholders would do. And it's that, you know, you have a critical mass of perhaps younger people, maybe 30 to 45, that are highly educated with graduate degrees. Some of them have more than one. Where is the intellectualism? Where is the, other than at the universities, the book houses or the coffee houses or, you know, the...
We have 7 book discussion groups.
Right, but you're not marketing perhaps to our generation, or you're not getting to us in the medium of which we would see something like that and want to be a part of it.
So we need to do that.
Yes. And I think that that is also another role stakeholders will play. And I've spoken on generational issues in the workplace, but also taking a look at perhaps large companies and their recruiting materials. You know, if I'm handed a brochure and the president is on the cover and it's a white male in his 70s and he's never taken a day off from work, is that really what the Generation X wants to see when it's going to work for a company?
Right.
Probably not. We'd like a link to your website where there's diverse faces and people are working in teams on different things, and that there's a chance for us to make a real difference. And that, by the way, if you take a 5-day vacation with your family, it's not a big deal.
Right.
You know, and so we will be doing some consulting and perhaps with employers and maybe different organizations who really do want to reach different demographics. And, you know, they're already here. And I think that that's another thing we were overlooking until we brought together this critical mass.
Yeah, I think another program on teams would certainly be worthwhile, because the concept, the way it's really practiced in business, purely a team, is a creative process amongst people with different abilities that all bring something to the table. And it's not a company saying, we're a team, now set up and sit down, you're playing first.
And the millennials in particular, very much like working in groups. I've written a few articles on millennials, mostly because they value input from others and they like to see the big picture in the end product.
Sounds good to work for.
Yeah, and their role in it. And, you know, a lot of times, and I've had a great opportunity several times to sit on what I refer to as intergenerational teams, whether it's for a community project or on a particular board or whatever it is. I always feel like I've come out and I've learned something.
And it's refreshing.
Yes, from either generations before me and their experience, or generations behind me of what not to do,
right,
or perhaps, you know, a new idea that I've presented that, wow, you know, we never thought of that because we never stepped out of the box and never had that viewpoint. Because a lot of times what I always hear is, well, this is the way we've done it, and that's why we're going to continue to that, you know. And our response, Generation X in particular, now that we're getting into middle management and, you know, we're coming into the workforce with more than a 4-year degree, is, well, not only is that old response to an old problem, but it isn't working.
It was never working.
So where do we go from here? And let us help you. And that just because we have a great new idea doesn't mean we're replacing you. We need you, the boomers and the traditionalists, to take your experience and the idea and help us implement it in the best way possible. And these types of, you know, teams in the workplace or teams for nonprofit boards or whatever the issue is, helps to better integrate society and perhaps says to a millennial and to Generation X that this is a type of society you want to be involved in.
I think we're just about out of time, but I don't want people not to be able to reach you. So
Okay.
let's give them a little contact information.
Oh, I have a website. You can catch me
And we
at
can put it on the screen too.
www.hedgemanlaw.com.
Okay.
And my email you can send is on that web page as well.
Okay, very good.
So.
Well, I want to thank you, Catherine, for being on the show. It was refreshing.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Great. And so if anybody wants to reach you, they can check that email.
Absolutely.
Great.
And there's some great articles on my website for my law firm about generational issues, and some of the articles I've written for the Times-Union as well.
Super. And I want to thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed the show and invite you to the next show. Have a great week. Take care.
Welcome to Channel 17, the Town of Colonie Government Channel.